This is the most extraordinary medical file in the history of human archaeology, every bone inscribed with the marks of trauma, infection, and healing. The patient was a Neanderthal who lived 45,000 years ago. His left arm had been amputated. A crushing blow to the right supraorbital plate had left him permanently blind in one eye. His right leg was severely lame. By the brutal laws of the prehistoric wilderness, he should have been eliminated long ago. But what suffocates the mind is this. What force could possibly have driven a primitive group, one that did not even possess a complete language, to expend enormous survival costs to feed an individual who had lost nearly all capacity to work? What compelled them to sustain this burden? 45,000 years ago. Northern Iraq. The western foothills of the Zagros Mountains. Elevation approximately 750 meters. The entrance to Shanidar cave faced south. Set into the midsection of a grayish-yellow limestone cliff. The opening was roughly 25 meters wide and 8 meters tall. The interior extended northward for more than 40 meters. Reaching a maximum width of 53 meters, a colossal rock chamber capable of sheltering hundreds. Directly below the cave, a tributary gorge of the Great Zab River cut through the landscape. In the rainy season the water surged to within 30 meters of the cliff base. In the dry season it retreated, exposing broad stretches of pale gravel flats pocked with the hoof prints of wild goats and Persian fallow deer. The cave floor was a composite of tens of thousands of years of repeated accumulation, ash layers, fragmented bone layers, lithic debitage layers, and collapsed limestone blocks, exceeding 15 meters in total depth. The air carried a compound smell: dampite calcium, aged bone grease, and bat guano. Fine water droplets seeped from the limestone ceiling, forming a thin mist in the updraft of the hearth fires, so that the light deep inside the cave always held a dim, granular, turbid quality. The Neanderthal group occupying this cave numbered approximately 20 to 25 individuals. Their bodies were survival machines forged for the brutal conditions of Ice Age Eurasia. Adult males averaged roughly 164 to 168 centimeters in height but weighed between 75 and 85 kilograms. That mass came from three sources: extraordinarily dense cortical bone, femoral cortical thickness 1.4 to 1.5 times that of contemporary sapiens, thick muscle slabs stacked along short, stocky limbs, and a subcutaneous fat layer distributed uniformly across the entire body. Their body plan strictly obeyed Bergmann's rule and Allen's rule. In cold climates, endothermic animals trend toward greater body volume and shorter distal limbs, minimizing the surface area to volume ratio to reduce heat loss. The Neanderthal crural index, the ratio of tibial to femoral length, was significantly lower than in tropically originated sapiens. Their lower legs were shorter, their thighs thicker, the entire lower limb resembling two stone pillars engineered for load-bearing rather than running. Their brachial index was similarly low. Fingers were short and broad. The apical tufts at the terminal phalanges abnormally wide, meaning the soft tissue pads of the fingertips were extremely thick, providing greater contact area and stronger friction when gripping stone tools and processing prey. Shanidar I was a member of this group. Based on a comprehensive assessment of skeletal developmental markers and dental wear, his age at death was estimated at between 40 and 50 years, an extraordinarily advanced age for a Middle Paleolithic Neanderthal. Average Neanderthal life expectancy is estimated at only 30 to 35 years. Individuals surviving past 40 are exceedingly rare in the fossil record. But what made Shanidar I one of the most famous specimens in the history of paleoanthropology was not his age. It was the suffocating inventory of trauma inscribed upon his body. Starting at the head, the right supraorbital region bore a severe blunt force impact injury. The fracture line extended from the midbrow ridge obliquely inward and downward, causing the orbital roof to collapse. The fracture margins had completely remodeled, new bone tissue covered the break surfaces. The callus smooth and rounded, meaning the injury occurred many years before death. He lived with it for a long time. The right eye was almost certainly permanently blind. Moving down to the left upper limb, the left humerus was completely absent below the midshaft. The stump presented a morphology that paleopathologists term amputation-level atrophy. The shaft terminus had contracted into a conical, sealed residual end. The medullary cavity plugged with dense bone tissue. The stump surface bore no saw marks or stone tool cut marks. But the degree of bony remodeling suggested the truncation occurred at least 10 to 15 years before death. Two principal hypotheses exist regarding the cause. One proposes that gangrene following severe trauma led to natural sloughing or a crude amputation performed by companions. The other suggests a congenital developmental anomaly. But regardless of cause, the result was identical. Throughout his adult life, he had only one usable hand. And that was not all. The left scapula and clavicle also exhibited severe degenerative atrophy. The scapular spine had thinned. The glenoid fossa had shrunk. The roughness of muscle attachment sites had dropped precipitously. This meant that not only was the forearm missing, but the entire left shoulder girdle musculature had severely atrophied from prolonged disuse. His left shoulder was at least 3 to 4 centimeters narrower than his right. Viewed from behind, his torso presented a distinctly asymmetrical silhouette. Continuing downward, the right femur and tibia exhibited severe degenerative osteoarthropathy. The articular cartilage on the femoral head had worn away over large areas, exposing the subchondral bone beneath and generating extensive osteophytes, bone spurs. The tibial plateau was similarly covered with osteophytes. The joint space severely narrowed. The metatarsals of the right foot bore healed stress fracture traces. Taken together, all of this meant every step he took with his right leg produced excruciating bone-on-bone grinding pain. His gait was severely impaired. His walking speed was likely 1/3 to 1/2 that of a normal Neanderthal. One eye, one arm, one lame leg. In a Paleolithic cave with no wheelchair, no crutch, no assistive device of any kind. This individual's capacity for independent survival was virtually zero. He could not participate in stone tool manufacture requiring bimanual coordination. He could not participate in javelin thrust hunting requiring binocular vision for distance judgment. He could not traverse rugged mountain terrain at normal speed to keep pace with group migration. He may not even have been able to perform the most basic food processing independently. Pinning a bone-in piece of raw meat with one hand while tearing fascia with the teeth requires an extremely awkward body posture and neck muscle strength far exceeding normal levels. And yet he survived. 4 decades. The repeatedly healed trauma marks on his skeleton constitute a certificate of survival spanning tens of years. Someone was feeding him. Someone was protecting him. Someone was waiting for him. To understand why Shanidar 1's survival was biologically near impossible, one must first understand how desperately tight the daily energy budget of a Neanderthal group actually was. Based on biomechanical modeling of Neanderthal body size, muscle mass, and activity patterns, the total daily energy expenditure of an adult male Neanderthal is estimated at between 3,500 and 5,000 kilocalories, 60 to 100% higher than a modern sedentary human of equivalent weight. 3 reasons. First, their basal metabolic rate was significantly elevated due to massive muscle mass and dense bone. Second, although their surface area to volume ratio was optimized, the thermogenic demand to maintain a 37-degree core temperature when winter air dropped to -20 was still enormous. Third, their hunting method, close-range ambush and hand-to-hand stabbing kills, consumed far more physical energy than the projectile weapon hunting that sapiens would later develop. A group of 20 required a total daily food intake of approximately 70,000 to 100,000 kilocalories. In the Zagros mountain ecosystem, these calories came primarily from 3 sources: meat and marrow from wild goats and Persian fallow deer, seasonally available wild plant tubers and nuts, and small game such as hares and rock pigeons. Meat dominated the diet absolutely. Analysis of nitrogen isotope ratios, delta superscript 1n, in Neanderthal bone collagen shows that their trophic position overlapped almost exactly with contemporary apex carnivores such as cave hyenas and wolves, meaning more than 80% of their protein came from animal flesh. This heavily meat-dependent dietary structure meant that every individual's value to the group was directly indexed to their hunting contribution. The absence of one adult male hunter meant not only one less unit of killing capacity, but also one more mouth requiring feeding, a double energy deficit. Shanidar 1's physical condition transformed him completely from an energy producer into a pure energy consumer. His daily basal metabolic requirement, even accounting for reduced muscle mass from the missing left arm, still fell between 1,800 and 2,000 kilocalories. Adding minimal daily activity expenditure, moving within the cave, maintaining a seated posture, chewing and eating, his total daily energy requirement was at least around 2,500 kilocalories. This meant the other members of the group had to kill an additional 1.5 to 2 kilograms of net meat every day, edible portion after deboning and skinning, solely to feed this one individual who could not procure food for himself. 1.5 kilograms of net meat every day. 4 decades. In an environment where every hunt could cost the hunter injury or death. This was an extraordinarily heavy survival tax. So what did Shanidar 1's body endure across those decades? Disassembled piece by piece from a skeletal pathology perspective. After the left arm was truncated, the medullary cavity of the stump was sealed within weeks to months by newly formed woven bone, a rapid but structurally crude emergency repair tissue. Subsequently, the woven bone was slowly replaced over months to years by denser, more organized lamellar bone, and the stump ultimately formed a smooth, closed surface. During this process, the surrounding soft tissues, muscle remnants, severed blood vessel ends, severed nerve ends, underwent scarring contraction. The cut nerve endings formed neuromas within the scar tissue, tangled masses of aberrantly proliferating nerve fibers. Exquisitely sensitive to pressure and temperature change. Every sudden drop in temperature. Every accidental bump of the residual limb against the cave wall. The neuromas would fire a burst of searing phantom limb pain. After his right eye went blind. The right visual cortex, area V1 on the medial surface of the occipital lobe, lost signal input from the right eye. In modern clinical cases, following monocular blindness, the brain undergoes cross-modal cortical reorganization within months. The cortical territory deprived of visual input is partially colonized by auditory and tactile signals. Shanidar I's brain very likely underwent a similar reorganization. His auditory localization and tactile sensitivity may have sharpened after blindness, partially compensating for lost stereoscopic vision. But this compensation was limited, in tasks requiring precise distance judgment, such as throwing a stone at a moving prey animal. Monocular vision carried a fatal disadvantage. The progression of his right leg's degenerative joint disease can likewise be precisely reconstructed. Cartilage wear is an irreversible cascade. The collagen fiber network on the cartilage surface first develops microcracks. Synovial fluid seeps into the cracks, causing proteoglycan loss from the cartilage matrix. The cartilage layer thins, softens, and ultimately wears through completely. The exposed subchondral bone plate hardens and thickens under repeated mechanical stress, a process called sclerosis. Simultaneously, the periosteum at the joint margins, stimulated by abnormal stress, begins to proliferate, forming outward projecting osteophytes. These osteophytes ring the joint surface like a crown of irregular stone teeth, grinding and colliding against the opposing bone surface with every flexion and extension. No painkillers. No anti-inflammatory drugs. No joint replacement surgery. Only pain. Continuous. Worsening with every step. Decades-long bone-grinding pain. And in that pain, he lived to between 40 and 50 years of age. Why save him? From a strictly evolutionary biology perspective, an individual who has lost both reproductive value and productive value contributes zero to the group's gene pool. The logic of natural selection is merciless. Every calorie of food should be allocated to individuals who maximize the group's overall fitness: young hunters, lactating mothers, healthy children. Continuously investing scarce food resources in a disabled individual who cannot reciprocate is, in the economics of energy, a losing transaction. But the Neanderthals made that losing transaction. And not just once. Shanidar I was not an isolated case. In the same cave, from the same cultural layer, another Neanderthal skeleton was recovered, designated Shanidar V, bearing a deep, bone-penetrating slash-wound scar on the left side of the face, cutting obliquely from the lateral orbital rim to the zygomatic arch. The healed callus had risen into a permanent bony ridge. At La Chapelle aux Saints in France, the old man Neanderthal skeleton had lost nearly all teeth before death. The alveolar bone completely resorbed, meaning that for a considerable period before dying, he could not chew solid food and must have depended on companions to pre-process his meals, pounding or pre-chewing them, before placing them in his mouth. At Guattari Cave in Italy and Krapina in Croatia, Neanderthal sites likewise yielded skeletons of individuals bearing severe pathological damage who had survived for years. A pattern emerged. Neanderthal groups systematically, repeatedly provided long-term care to members who had lost the capacity to work. What is the evolutionary explanation for this behavior? The first hypothesis derives from kin selection theory. Neanderthal effective population size was extremely small. Genomic heterozygosity analysis suggests the global effective breeding population of Neanderthals may have been sustained at merely 1,000 to 5,000 individuals over long periods. In such a small population, the average coefficient of relatedness between members within any single group was extremely high. The 20-odd individuals in Shanidar Cave were very likely all first- or second-degree relatives, parents, children, siblings, uncles, nephews, cousins. According to Hamilton's rule, when the benefit of an altruistic act multiplied by the coefficient of relatedness exceeds the cost of the act, RB greater than C, the altruistic behavior will be preserved by natural selection. In a group with extremely high relatedness, the cost of feeding a disabled relative can be offset by the indirect benefit of preserving shared genes. The second hypothesis is more pragmatic. Knowledge storage. A Neanderthal who had lived more than 40 years, even with a broken body, carried in his brain decades of ecological knowledge: which valley held migrating ibex in which season, which berries were poisonous, which flint outcrop yielded the finest raw material, from which direction the last catastrophic blizzard had come. In a society without writing, without any external information storage medium, the brain of an elderly individual was the only hard drive. Killing or abandoning an elder was equivalent to formatting a hard drive loaded with decades of survival data. The third hypothesis touches a deeper neurobiological mechanism: the evolution of empathy. Average Neanderthal cranial capacity ranged from 1400 to 1600 milliliters, larger even than the modern sapiens average. Although brain size does not directly equal cognitive capacity, morphological analysis of Neanderthal endocasts shows that their prefrontal cortex, the brain region responsible for social cognition, emotional regulation, and empathic response, while possibly proportionally slightly smaller than in sapiens, still possessed considerable absolute volume. The mirror neuron system. The anterior cingulate cortex. The insula, the neural circuits responsible in the modern human brain for feeling another's pain, were very likely already highly developed in the Neanderthal brain. When Shanidar one's stump struck the cave wall and he emitted a pain-distorted guttural sound, the anterior cingulate cortex of the companion standing beside him may have produced a neural activation highly similar to the experience of pain itself. They felt his pain. This empathy-driven caregiving behavior, once fixed within a small group through kin selection, would become a stable group-level behavioral pattern. But here lies a cruel paradox. It was precisely this intense loyalty and deep caregiving toward group members that may have become one of the factors in the Neanderthals' ultimate extinction. Their social networks were extremely closed. Genetic evidence shows that gene flow between different Neanderthal groups occurred at frequencies far lower than among contemporary sapiens. They invested all their social energy into a small circle of highly related individuals, establishing almost no connections with outside groups. This strategy was efficient in stable environments. It maximized internal cooperation and resource sharing. But when the environment underwent violent change, intensifying glaciation, sapiens incursion, prey population collapse, this closed social structure lacked resilience. It could not distribute risk through intergroup alliances. The sapien strategy was the precise opposite. Sapien social networks were more open, more fluid, more extensive. They established trade relationships with strangers, exchanged lithic raw materials and shell ornaments across hundreds of kilometers, intermarried frequently between groups. This wide-area social network provided an enormous buffer in times of crisis. When one group's hunting grounds were exhausted, they could turn to allied groups for help. Neanderthals traded breadth for depth. Sapiens traded depth for breadth. In the species competition of 40,000 years ago, breadth won. Summer. 1957. Iraqi Kurdistan. Shanidar Cave. Ralph Seletsky's archaeological team, working in the indurated sediment of the cave's fourth cultural layer, exposed the skeleton of Shanidar 1 mm by millimeter with bamboo picks and toothbrushes. He lay on his side beside a collapsed limestone slab, legs slightly flexed, his sole remaining right arm bent across his chest. The right side of his cranium had been partially crushed by a massive rock that had fallen from the cave ceiling, very likely his immediate cause of death. A roof collapse. On some ordinary night, ending decades of survival in a broken body. His bones were extracted, catalogued, packaged, and shipped to the United States. In laboratories at Columbia University and later the Smithsonian Institution, paleopathologist Eric Trinkaus conducted bone-by-bone macroscopic and microscopic examination. X-ray films revealed internal structural details invisible to the naked eye. The trabecular alignment pattern inside the left humeral stump indicated that the truncation occurred before the skeleton had fully matured. He may have lost his left forearm during adolescence. Asymmetric cortical bone thickness distribution in the right femoral neck suggested that years of abnormal gait had shifted the mechanical loading pattern. An anomalous area of bony overgrowth on the posterior surface of the right calcaneus was consistent with chronic strain at the Achilles tendon attachment. His right leg, bearing nearly all his body weight, had kept the tendon under perpetual overstretching. Every bone was a diary page. Every pathological trace was a timestamp. Arrange those timestamps in sequence and you reconstruct a life trajectory spanning decades. Adolescent amputation or congenital deformity. Facial trauma and right eye blindness in early adulthood. Then decades of limping and chronic pain. And finally death between 40 and 50 when a falling rock struck him down. And at every node along that trajectory, one pair of hands or many, none of them his own, were holding him up. When the amputation wound was infected and fever raged, someone laid a hide soaked in river water across his scalding forehead. When he could not chew tough raw meat, someone sliced it thin with a stone tool, pre-chewed it with their own molars, and fed it into his mouth. When the group needed to relocate camp, someone slowed the entire party's pace, waiting for him to limp his way forward. On freezing nights deep in the cave, someone pressed their body tight against his incomplete left side, using their own warmth to fill the thermal gap left by his missing half-limb. None of these behaviors left any direct archaeological trace. No fiber residue from bandages. No pollen record of medicinal plants. No material evidence datable by carbon-14. They exist only within an indirect but irrefutable logical inference. An individual this severely disabled could not have survived for decades under Middle Paleolithic conditions without sustained external care. His skeleton itself, the healed trauma, the remodeled stumps, the degenerated but still functioning joints, is the ironclad proof that caregiving occurred. The skeleton of Shanidar I is now stored in the collections vault of the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C. Constant temperature, 21 degrees Celsius. Constant humidity, 45%. Each bone rests on a custom-cut acid-free non-woven fabric liner. The identification labels are written in acid-free ink. 45,000 years ago, a Neanderthal group, with the extra 1.5 kilograms of meat they hunted every day, wrote a declaration that contained no words. "We will not leave you behind." That declaration was not carved into a cave wall. It was not woven into language. It was not recorded by any symbolic system. It was written in bone. Written in the healed stump. Written in the remodeled callus. Written in every single day that a disabled individual, who should not have survived past 30, stubbornly lived on for 10 to 20 years more. Nature did not care about his suffering. The algorithm of natural selection contains no variable called mercy. But in the gaps of that algorithm, between the cold equations of relatedness coefficients and energy budgets, a variable had been missed, or rather, had been forced into the equation by 20 Neanderthals inside that cave. That variable has no name. It is older than language. Older than Homo sapiens. Older than any known symbolic system. Its only physical evidence is a single healed, smooth, silent broken bone.